Augustani, thank you. And I have to say I'm deeply honored to be invited to this convention. I have great respect for the invitation, and I commend the committee and the members for inviting me here today, because it is part of our efforts of reconciliation in this country. And I am so grateful because I am a union member. I am a member of the ACTRA Manitoba, which is an affiliate of the Winnipeg Labour Council. And I'm an Indigenous person, and I am very proud of my ancestry, and I am very proud of my family and the resilience they gave me, and I'm very grateful for the opportunities I've been given in my work and in my role as a public person. And so I do acknowledge this effort, and I think it is a great effort, and I thank you so much for that. And I would also like to acknowledge a couple things. One is that we are on the traditional territory of the Treaty 6 people, and I'd like to also acknowledge the National Day of Mourning. And in both those contexts, I feel very privileged to be here. And because I too come from a family of people that have worked hard, labored furiously, and been part of the building of this country. And I've also been part of experience. I always think it's like, our historical experience together has been said, is like caused a lot of thorny issues. But I really believe that we're on a tipping point. I really do believe that there is an opportunity now to move forward and to start looking at answers. How do we move forward collectively? How do we reconcile? How do we find grace and space within ourselves and our, cultural and political landscapes to do this? So what I'd like to do today is, because I have 22 minutes and 50 seconds now, I'd like to kind of maybe use my family and my own experience a little bit to give you some background, and then talk about the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and also some of the, personal aspects that I've had, a great privilege to meet with great leaders, great thinkers, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and just share some of those thoughts with you. I'm actually found a document which I just will leave with you here today, but it was created by the Errol Black Chair in Labour Issues, and this was done for the Canadian Council Policy Alternatives. And it is called The Indigenous People, Wage Labour and Trade Unions, the Historical Experience in Canada. And this report was just released in April of 2017, so it was just released very recently. It was written by Lynn Fernandez and Jim Silver, and I know Jim very well. I'm from Manitoba, as I said, and I come from a family that I had mentioned where my mother is actually from the Treaty 9 territory in northwestern Ontario. My mother comes from a small, remote flying community of 300 people. And so when I was a child growing up, we had literally never even had a car in the community. We didn't ever even have a winter road, and we had never had a store, so we didn't have sustained contact with non-Native people. My grandparents didn't speak English. My extended family didn't speak English. If you saw north of 60, it was like literally like Joe Gumba's cabin. It's like my grandmother's house. So it was, log houses. People had a traditional economy. People had a traditional way of governance. So people took care of each other. Women and men had their roles, and people had a sense of being in a community that took care of itself, much like our unions, our brother and sisterhood. And that was really, for me, I always think I am so grateful for that opportunity to have had my family sort of intact, because it was that resilience that has kind of, I've come to, as I'm getting older, I see it as a vessel, that has really been able to guide me and steer me, in that I have, at the core of me, this knowledge that I am safe and secure because of the love of my family, because of the way that I was really blessed as a child to be raised by people of the land, people that worked hard, were disciplined, had not had these encounters with imperialist Canada that, really tried to undermine their sense of who they were and what, that sense of self-determination that we all look for in terms of taking care of ourselves, our families, each other. And so that sense that I have has really steered me. And I'm really always felt like that there was safety and security there. And my mother, who has passed on now, but she would have been 83 this year, she passed away 3 years ago. She went to residential school, and she was actually one of the first group of children that were flown out. So they literally flew in a cargo plane, put the children into the cargo plane, and then flew them out. So it really has had a lot of devastating impacts, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But what I really want to talk about is this background, my mother's. Because this background that my mother was raised in until she was 8 years old gave her this sense that we are there for each other. That as a community, whether that community is her community of 300 people, of Cree speaking Cree people, or whether that community is Winnipeg and a larger society of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, that's our job, is to take care of each other. Ensure that the weakest of us have a safety net, to ensure that we are there together. That's the purpose of being human. In fact, in Cree, I asked my dad, there's this word, Tebendamayasin, and it's like, what does that mean in Cree? Like, what? It doesn't mean self-determination, because there's, no word for, like, literally self-determination in Cree. And my dad said, it means that by virtue of being human, you have a relationship with the Creator, and that gives you an autonomy, a self-determination. So by rights of just being, having this relationship with the Creator, that gives you the right of self-determination. So it's like, I'm really grateful for that. So my mother had that sense. So my mother went on to become like a trailblazer, with many people in Winnipeg that had started the first soup kitchen, the Agape Soup Kitchen, Winnipeg Harvest, the food bank, women's workers in community working environments, My mother also spoke her language. It was her first language. So later in life, my mom went on to become a chaplain, because my mom had left the church. I wasn't raised in the church because my mom left the church because of what had happened in residential school and didn't go back until she was older. So when she was in her 50s, she went back to school and became a chaplain, and then became an Anglican priest. And she ran a church for people that didn't speak English. So she just had this in her. This was very much this sense that we have in these fellowships, like this, where we take care of each other, is very much a sense that I had growing up because of my mom. And my mom worked very closely with, many, many NDP members that were in Winnipeg. And so it was a part of my experience too after we moved to the city. We moved to the city when I was 5 because my mom didn't want us kids to be taken to residential school. And when I was 5, we were living in a community that is called Chimahawan. It is now referred to as Easterville. And we lived in a community where my father worked for that community. My father is Cree from Norrie House in the Treaty 5 territory. We lived in a community where my father was fighting against the hydro development on behalf of Cree people in northern Manitoba. And that experience really informed my life too. So in terms of, Indigenous people and Indigenous rights. Very similar, and on the other hand, it appears, at that time, of hydro development and, of course, labor issues. So what had happened was, it was in 1960, and, Manitoba Hydro sent letters to communities that we're going to be forcibly moving you, we'll be flooding you. But at the time, when you think of 1960, it was only in 1951 that the Indian Act had been amended in Canada to allow Indian people to gather and speak politically in groups larger than 3, to have a political voice against the Indian agent, to hire a lawyer. So at that time, we also didn't have any constitutional rights. We didn't have Indian or treaty rights that were entrenched in Canada's Constitution. So in 1960, when one of the neighboring Cree communities that was being forcibly relocated, and were informed by a letter of intent by the Manitoba government, they called my father, who had had post-secondary education, because he was just very fortunate. His father, my grandfather, was an Olympic runner and had also served in World War I. And because my father's dad was renowned, they had sent my father at the residential school where he went to the town school. They ensured that my father received this adequate education, a comparable education to other Canadians, whereas kids in the residential schools were not receiving that education. And then he went on to post-secondary school. That's what they did for him. So because my father was a Cree man who spoke, his first language was Cree as well, and had post-secondary education in 1960, which was very unusual, he was asked by a neighboring Cree community to come and work with them to fight the hydro development that was forcibly relocating them. My father is now 88 years old. He's going to be 89 this year. My father also went back to school when he was about 50, and he went and took a law degree. And my father has, since 1960, worked on behalf of Cree people in the issues related to hydro development in Manitoba. And LSA too, I gotta say, there's much to be learned through our experiences, and I really cannot express to you how difficult our past has been, but how much opportunity we have to sort through it. This is not, our legacy is really the values of who we are, right? Our legacy and what drives us is that resilience, this goodness that we have. That's what's going to help us get through these issues. Because I know, as a daughter of, I call myself a daughter of hydro. I know everything about hydro development in Manitoba. My father still works with the Cree communities. He's there. So when I look at issues related to labor too in Manitoba for First Nations people, I know the history of labor related to hydro. And I know that we still don't have an Aboriginal labor force that is being, considered as a primary labor force in northern Manitoba. I also know through my experience that in Manitoba, Thompson, for instance, which is it's a mining town, steel workers. My father was one of the men, prior to working for the Cree community, when he was a younger man, had actually worked in the mine in Flin Flon, and then had gone, they asked all these Cree men to come and clear the land for this town that they were building in this mine. So Cree men came from Norrie House, Oxford House, York Landing, all the neighboring communities, Nelson House. And my father was one of those men, but he was also one of those men that couldn't get a job in the mine, once the mine was built and the town was built. My brother, my oldest brother, who is now 62, who grew up in a neighboring community, our home community, which is Norrie House, and he couldn't get a job in the mine. And my brother, who ended up working as the director of education for Nelson House, which is a First Nation, which is right outside of the town of Thompson and is actually the traditional territory on which the nickel had been found. who were excluded from the 50th anniversary of the Inco mine. So that's what I mean. This is a very thorny past, right? But, nonetheless, and I'm just going to make this final point, which is my nephew, who's now 38, he couldn't even get a job at the mine. Still couldn't. So generations, of Indigenous men excluded from opportunities. And so because of that, because of governments at that time in 1960 and up until 1982, and then subsequent, we have case law now. So we have a lot of case law now around our land rights and land title, and but prior to that time, we still had this we were still all, I think, we've all been impacted by a colonial mindset, like an imperialist mindset. And so it's a conditioning. And I think that one of the wisest things that I think that my family ever said to me was, I was a member of parliament when the settlement agreement was being tabled in the House of Commons for residential school survivors. And, because again, it's my father's work has been around this hydro stuff. We've been through it's this countless generating stations and countless camps, and where, we've been excluded, and mines, and we have the homeless centers in northern Manitoba have Cree names. What kind of injustice is that? That's our traditional territory. And the homeless shelters have Cree names. It's just, and so what happens is when we've been so, people like myself who've been so privileged to have had and known our people in a way where it makes us so proud, and we understand the values that are very similar, to labor union and labor values, which is that we have to stand together. But we also know that there has been an inequity in our histories. And my father said to me when I had to speak to that settlement agreement, remember, my girl, don't get upset. He says, because what they've done to us, they've done to their own. He said, that's their history. He says, so try and remember that. We're not alone in this. So I really considered that. And when you look at labor issues, right? Same history. So it's this inequity. And the inequity, creates the disparities. It creates the situations. And so even when you look at these, this great report, it ends with, a discussion about women's issues and women's rights and the women's movement. So, we're right in the middle of this. And I always think, again, when people become, very discouraged, very demeaning or belittling about this, the Aboriginal issues, I always think, the best is ahead of us. Because what we're going to be able to do is bring forward the best from each of our sectors, to find solutions. Do I have solutions? No. I always like it when people say, what you Aboriginal people should do? I go, great, you know what? Can you phone the Prime Minister and maybe tell them, because you've got it all figured out, it's really, come on now. So I have to say, I also have to I wanted to I made a note on my paper here. Where is it? Did I throw it somewhere? Okay, the guy who was saying, Mr. Number One, he says, I've never been called number one before, but I've been called a shithead. That fellow? Okay, I had a paper here. He said, and he's talking about different caucuses and about political participation, right? And he says, and there's this caucus over there, and there's that caucus, and then there's the Mickey Mouse and Lone Ranger caucus. And I thought, yeah, Tonto's not there. I noticed he didn't include Tonto in that caucus. It's like, yeah, like, because Tonto didn't want to join the union. You know, it's like, kind of like, this is our tradition, right? It's like this old thing of, you know, again, we have a shared history. It is difficult. Indigenous people have traditionally been excluded from, you know, unions. We know why, like most of us, but that is not going to stop. It was just like, you know, why unions were born in the first place. For those very same reasons, women have like said the same thing. Indigenous people are now, like we're at the place now where it's going to be about this large fellowship. And it has to be through education. So I really appreciate these pieces on education, capacity building. It really has to be about getting to know each other. And I talk about the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because I would just like to ask all of you, like just please, just go look at a website. Just like check it out, just look at it, because it will give you some information about the history of Indigenous people. And like was said, it was only in '96 that the last residential school was closed. But they started in the late 1800s, and they really got going in the 1930s and 40s. Since that time, there was then a subsequent 60s scoop. And there was a saying, and you know, like, what's his name, Duncan Scott had said, we want to take the Indian out of the child. So there was this saying in the US, you know, very brutal colonization, where they said the only good Indian is a dead Indian. And in Canada, they said the only good Indian is a non-Indian. That is what Harold Cardinal, who was actually a Treaty 6 Indigenous historian, coined that phrase, you know, prior to the constitutional talks of '82. So what has happened in this country is because of Indigenous people, we have had this sense that regardless of what has happened, you know, by over 100 years of policy and then legislation to destroy our families, our communities, and our land base, which has had like horrible, tragic impacts on our lives. I can't even tell you how much that impacts our lives. I went to the 7-Eleven store yesterday, and this young woman, she was only 30, in a wheelchair, bags of stuff around her, you know, swearing away. Beautiful, beautiful young woman, scarred, tattooed. I lost a leg. And she looks at me and she says, hey, you're Tina Keeper, eh? And I said, yes. So I always feel like this is the blessing, you know, where I have had. And she says, you know, I've had a rough time. She goes, and I don't want to go into the hospitals. I don't want to go into the jails. And so I like staying homeless. And I mean, it broke my heart. You know, I thought she's the most beautiful and most tragic. So that's what's happened. You know, it's just a daily thing. And it's a murder to missing Indigenous women. There's a national inquiry right now. You know, one of my dear friends, she's an HR director where my sister works. They've worked together for 15 years. Her daughter was just murdered. You know, I've lost family to suicide, homicide. It shouldn't be happening, you know? And thank you. And so sometimes we get tired, you know? I mean, I know in your history, you know that too. And so we really, really need to stand together. So I call upon you to check out the Truth and Reconciliation website. Just read it. Just, you know, read about what Canada's history is. But also know that on the other hand, we have also been able to preserve knowledge, values, languages, cultures, and that is going to be a gift as well to Canada. You know, because one of the things that, you know, we've said, I've worked on suicide prevention, regional projects, and I've worked on the issue of murdered and missing women as a volunteer for, you know, 15 years now, 20 years on suicide prevention. One of the things that we really believe is that a lot of the mental health strategies and a lot of the strategies that Canadians are using, because even for Canadian youth, suicide is the highest rate of suicide amongst Canadian youth of any Western nation. So there's something that we really need to do together, and we really believe that we can bring forward gifts that we can contribute to change things as well for all Canadians. And so as we get better, as we bring forward our traditional knowledge and our gifts, we will be able to collectively work together for the benefit of all. And I really, really encourage, thank you, each and every one of you, though, to participate in this by educating yourself. And I want to really thank you for this opportunity once again. Agosani, it is really a really great honor for me to be here with you. It has been, I used to get panic attacks when I had to go to my first steelworkers meeting in Thompson. I was like, there's steelworkers from all over North America coming. I said to my assistant, okay, I was at MP, and I said, I will talk to 3 people or we'll do 10 minutes, whichever comes first, and then I'm gone. I said, I have such anxiety, because again, it's a really, really thorny past, and I'm going over now, but I will be just done in a sec. And she said to me, okay, she says, no problem. She goes, but you gotta go in. This is part of your writing. Because, when I was an MP, the Indigenous people were always excluded from the, the MP arena and arms. So, that was sort of my thing, was okay, I'm gonna really make it, the Aboriginal people, Métis First Nations people in my writing feel like they're part of this. But, I had to do it for everybody because that's what you got to do. And I was so scared. Terrified. I mean, this is part of what our history is how it's informed us. Because we've been excluded, right? So I kind of resentful, but also kind of fearful. Anyway, so she says, okay, let's go in. We go in. 2 hours later, there I am, just blabbing away still, having a good time, taking pictures. So, I gotta say, for each and every one of us, we have prejudice, we have presumptions, but we gotta get to know each other. So I thank you for this opportunity. God bless you all. And again, once again, thank you so much for inviting me here, and I will leave. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.